Hello everyone, and welcome to Putting Student, Alumni and Staff at the Centre of Universities Digital Transformation, a Times Higher Education Roundtable held in partnership with Salesforce.org. My name is Alistair Lawrence, I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. So, as we're all aware, managing the student journey has become increasingly complicated in recent months, but there now exists an opportunity to build on the innovation and modernisation that universities have already delivered during the past year. Before we get into the points for discussion, I'd like to recommend if you can just drop your name and affiliation in a. Do we have a chat box? I don't think we do. Okay, sorry. So we can just before you speak for the first time, if you can just give your name and affiliation to your colleagues, that way that we know who everyone is. So I'd like to start by asking quite a broad question about how can universities create student-centric practices that maximize things like acquisition, retention, attainment, and employability? And is it important that universities now more than ever start to look at this process holistically when they look at how they manage student journeys? Everyone's a bit shy to begin with. Louise, perhaps can we come to you first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Louise Olney. I'm Head of Online Student Experience at the Open University. So we've been delivering digital learning and teaching for a very long time, but I would say more recently we're putting, rather than just the experience being online, the actual learning and teaching contents online as well, much more than it ever has been. So it's moved from what was traditionally more sort of print-based into much more of a digital delivery of that learning content, which gives its own challenges and opportunities as well. So from our experience, the last 18 months I've been leading a project of looking at what the expectations are, or and the different experiences that students have had or expect to have from a learning and teaching experience online. And it's been really fascinating. We've had focus groups of students from across the UK, be it OU students studying at other learning providers, and also prospective students as well, about what they'd expect to find in a learning and teaching experience online. And actually what came out of it was there's actually very few formed expectations of what that would be, because it's actually quite new still. There's lots of digital expectations, but not necessarily those centred around the learning and teaching. So I think it's, it really is a pivotal moment of where we can actually define what that can be and use what those digital expectations are within learning and teaching. So we're creating, at the moment, we've done sort of, I think the last 12 months, we've been doing co-design sessions with students as well, where they've been designing their own student experience and what that ideally would be. And that's really what's come out of that one, is that there's a great deal of emphasis around community building, and how students want to create that community that they would perhaps normally have at a more traditional campus-based university, and how we can do that digitally. And that's a real challenge, but one that is very, very important, I would say, from a student success point of view. So feeling that sense of community within that academic institution, from a retention point of view and a success point of view, is really, really important. You might think it's wraparound support, but it's not. It's actually core to those students succeeding.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Louise. David, can I come to you next just to ask how that split is changing at Newcastle and what you've been able to build on in the past year?
I think I'd echo a little bit what Louise is really talking about there, in terms of understanding what your students are saying to you, and trying to listen to what they've said to you throughout this period. So we've been keeping very close attention to what students are saying to us through our student voice sort of platforms and so forth. And I think what students are saying to us in a more sort of campus-based approach is that they are very much missing that real world contact and experience. Their expectation and hope is that next year things are much better. I'm a personal tutor to a number of students, and speaking to them over this last week, many of them were expressing a real desire to get back to Newcastle, which is a great student-centric city to start with, to get back into that student experience in this final year for many of them of trying to have that, and to actually see people, to meet them in online space. And that's where I think digital is going to be an interesting addition to what we are supplying to the students. Where does digital sit? And when you talk to the students, digital sits at that crux of providing for more campus-based universities, that interactivity outside of the classroom, and it doesn't remove the classroom experience. Our students are very clearly wanting still that classroom-based experience, the buildings around them, that feeling of being on a campus. When you talk to them, that's part of their experience of joining our university. But outside of the classroom, they're looking for the resources, they're looking for the depth, they're looking for the library now to be more online. They're looking for all of the services which they access with university to all be at their fingertips, maybe on their phone and so forth. So it's very much looking at what the student experience is and the journey is, and listening to what those students are saying to us, I think, at the moment.
Great, thank you. Daniel, I'd like to come to you next, just because I'm aware that you are the Chief Information Officer at Edinburgh Napier University, and I was wondering how the engagement around data and information is starting to change when you look at the student journey. Is this something that you are paying more attention to, right from engagement for acquisition of students and to tracking things like employability and alumni engagement out the other side?
To be honest, I did wonder why you invited me to this meeting. I'm not the chief engagement officer.
Sorry.
No, I have been involved in online learning and stuff like that, but no, I'm an academic in a research centre with
okay.
Student teaching and with continuing professional development for professionals. So I can speak on the topic, but not on behalf of the university, I'm afraid.
No, that's absolutely fine. I'm sorry, yeah, clearly some of our data gathering is at fault there. But yeah, no, if you could, if you could tell us a little bit about how your role is changing and what changes you're looking to keep that have been particularly effective over the past few months.
Well, you just picked up when you introduced the question, you talked about employability, which is a focus that we've been looking at for our undergraduates and our research students as well. And so much has happened in the last 2 years about the way people work, the way that I work and my colleagues work, with more digital stuff and less physical travel. And the more I'm thinking that we ought to be building those skills for the new workplace into the teaching and learning that we do. My job before was a heck of a lot of travel, and sometimes a lot of it not worth it. A lot of phone calls, and neither of these things happen anymore. Everything is now more online stuff. It's online collaborations. It's using the all of the software that's available for that kind of thing, and then meetings like this. So that's what we've been thinking about, trying to recreate this experience for our students, to get them like more opportunity for them to work with students from other universities, with students on other courses, because I'm in an engineering department, also working with forestry. So we get architects from architecture departments, engineers from engineering departments, forestry from forestry stuff. And the last thing is just around like both forestry and engineering, very lab-based or fieldwork-based topics, which can be difficult to teach off campus. But also, especially for forestry, there's a lot of experience with distance learning, because often it's remote places that do those courses. So a lot of people that I've been working with have quite long experience of doing this kind of distance learning teaching. So it's taking that experience of people that have been doing it for a long time and combining it with the new technologies that have opened up a lot more possibilities in the last period.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. Mark, if I can come to you next, if you could give us an overview of your role at sorry.
Newcastle.
Yes, thank you.
That's all right.
I just tell us a bit about how how is the way that you're gathering data or using information changing in addition to all the pedagogical changes that are sweeping through the institution?
Yeah, so I am the CIO for Newcastle University, and you're going to get sort of the yin and yang of the two approaches that we're taking at Newcastle. And David very ably described the what I might call the scene at the coalface, which is directly in contact with our students and either delivering the experience that they're enjoying, or certainly being a big part of it and seeing how that works. And I'm at the other end, sort of digging under the ground to try and figure out how to make all this stuff stitch together. And the thing that we're digging is data, and that's kind of the challenge we have. And I think there are some interesting aspects to that, and the way that are related to the way that IT has come together in a large academic institution over a period of years. We never had, if you had a green field, you wouldn't do it like we're trying to do it right now. I think that's the key piece, because you would design it in a different way. We never foresaw this. And what we've seen in the last 12 months, but in particular with the pandemic, or 15 months, is an acceleration into a place where we're all playing catch up, and we're all kind of going, oh my God, we shouldn't do it like this. We shouldn't do what we're doing like this. So that's kind of the sort of feeling that we've got, is the data's all in the wrong place, in the wrong format, in the wrong quality, about the wrong people at the wrong time. And out of that, we've got to try and synthesize some sensible stories and storylines about how the journey is enjoyed through that. And in the middle of all that, we have to kind of wrap the chaos behind the scenes up into something that looks and feels great as well. We're making some headway with that, but I am sensitive to this. A lot of universities do this. They have a separate admission system which has the data about the students here. They have a separate student information system which has the data about the students here. They have a separate alumni system which has the data about all the students here. They have a separate staff system which has the data about all the staff here. And you know what? These are all connected. And I think that's the main message for us, is how do we get a connection between all that data? How do we make sure that there's a coherent model there? How do we ensure that the quality is consistent across the piece? How do we make sure the integrations happen? And then how do we apply the analytics, in some cases using quite sophisticated AI intelligence that we're doing now for our admissions, for example? How do we apply that AI to tell us something meaningful about where that journey goes next for that individual, whether that's into a course or whether that's into particular outcomes in their degree, whether that's into supporting their transition into the world of work, whether that's a lifelong CPT outcome. But and that's the challenge behind the scenes.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, there's several follow-up questions I could ask. I think the one big one is, it sounds like what you're dealing with is perhaps a cultural shift as well as the operational shift, in terms of having to join up data of differing qualities from different places across the university. Does this require you to work in a different way in terms of who you're working with internally as well as how you're working?
It certainly does. I'm trying to look at my camera here to see whether you can see my notepad down here, because the top of my list of challenges I've got is culture. And it is a big cultural change, because we have, this is, I'm sure David will agree, this is kind of a visceral feeling here at Newcastle, is the culture is about the place-based organization and enjoying that interaction with experts in their fields, delivering new knowledge to them as they go through their learning journey. And yet we're constrained in not being able to have the students here on campus for most of this last year, but also when they come back on campus, is it safe to have them pack out a 400-person lecture theatre? And it may not be. And so there is something about how we use technology to enhance the values and the culture and the place-based experience that we're trying to deliver, without disturbing and reducing any of the value in that. Culture's one of the three challenges I wrote down. Culture's one. History is another, which is this. All the IT tends to grow like Topsy, and suddenly when it comes to this, you kind of go, oh my God, we need to plumb it all together much better. And then the third challenge, of course, is managing expectations, because we'd like a magic wand to kind of just wave over this and all the problems go away, but of course we haven't got one. And it's going to take a little bit of time to get all this stitched together when we see the direction of travel and where we're going and how to get there.
Great, thank you, Mark. Joanne, if I come to you next, just if you can tell us a bit about your role at Glasgow and just how there is a need to address perhaps both the operational side of things, but also the cultural change when you are dealing with students and staff directly from a pedagogy role.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Yeah, so thinking about operationally, it's been challenging around, you know, everyone working remotely, everyone having access to all the systems that they need to have access to, providing clear support for staff and training. And I think that what we've got over the last year is a really good set of resources now that we can really take forward and build on. Around the culture, again, steer me back on track if I'm going off track, but I think that there's a lots of things that we've learned during COVID, and it's given everyone the opportunity, if there's anything positive to come out of this, to see what the possibilities are, and to be potentially sort of less fearful of online. However, it's not been in those ideal circumstances, as I think we all recognise, and everybody's been under a huge amount of pressure. So whilst on the one hand, there's been that opportunity to see, it's been in such a great deal of pressure that the challenge going forward is how do we continue to build on that work, take the really good things that have worked well, but do it in a way where staff feel that, you know, they're not completely under, you know, pressure, and that pressure's not continuing, because I think many of us recognise that it has been really challenging. I think from the students' perspective, well, what we've learned is there's some things that have been really great about doing more online. I think potentially the one piece to pick up on is on inclusivity. So I'm just going to take the example of students that, well, let's just take a autistic spectrum disorder, where, you know, they find that very big lecture environment that's potentially sensory overload, or they may want to go back and revisit materials later on, and they may also feel less confident to make contributions and have discussions in a really sort of big and busy environment. And some staff will say that have reported that they've been pleasantly surprised by more engagement online than they've maybe seen in the face-to-face setting. So I think if we can capture that and use that going forward in a way that we get a good blend of that on-campus experience, because equally we've got students who very much, as everyone said, rightly so, want that campus experience, that traditional experience, that's not going to change. And for me, thinking about the traditional lecture, whilst you know, I'm a huge advocate of technology, I'm not necessarily advocating completely removing that at all. That's very much gives students, doesn't it, the opportunity to see everyone in their class, see that there's, you know, large numbers on the programme, and see who everyone is, and connect with, you know, see the person that's teaching them. But equally, if we can combine that with some more collaborative work and thinking about the physical spaces supporting that collaborative work. And so we're providing those opportunities for students that really want to have that face-to-face connection to have that, but equally for those students, and again I mentioned inclusivity and I've mentioned autistic spectrum disorder, for those students who find those situations challenging, I think it's still important that we provide those opportunities and help to support to develop those skills for those sets of students, so that they're better equipped then to go on and be successful in the workplace. So it just trying to then capture best, but the challenges are then you know, the physical estate. I think there's been a lot of good work in a lot of universities to think about that change anyway, and just picking up on those good pieces and encouraging those online conversations to continue if they were potentially opening up those conversations for students that were otherwise not engaged. And just one final point is, I think we've seen some really good success with virtual labs and some prep being done in advance of classes, and I think that's given us the opportunity to see that we could do some of that prep online, so that when students are coming into that face-to-face setting, we're just making the most of that time of them being there and doing things rather than observing and then doing things. So hopefully
Great.
that's
Thank you, no. That's great, thank you. Neil, I'd like to come to you next if I can, because obviously you're based at another city university, and I wonder if you're experiencing the same kind of balancing act that others are describing, whereas as you make greater inroads into personalised learning, it becomes apparent that you're going to have to offer different models to get optimal outputs from different students.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. So yeah, I'm Neil Morris, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Leeds. And I think you're absolutely right, it is a balancing act. I think there's a lot of balancing going on in terms of thinking about next session and the balance of online and face-to-face. I think it's a really challenging time to have a conversation with students about any online learning next year after the last 15 months that we've just all been through. But I think in common with other universities, our kind of strategic approach is to move to a more blended way of offering education to students for all of the reasons that Joanne's just said. Access, flexibility and inclusivity are all enhanced by offering education in multiple modes and even for our on-campus students. I think the other balancing act is that the sector's looking to kind of grow, I guess, the continuum of learners that we engage with. So universities like mine have traditionally focused on 18 to 21-year-old undergraduate students. And I think we're looking more now to think, are we really serving society by focusing almost exclusively on that cohort? And so we're looking more to a wider continuum of students who can benefit from a higher education. So into the kind of professional and lifelong learning spaces, into the online space, into the kind of foundation areas, and more thinking about collaborations with other education providers, trying to support the kind of government initiative on skills-based education. So I think those are difficult balances as well, because moving into those new spaces for us require a different way of thinking about education, because increasingly those kinds of learners want much more flexible education, and that probably does mean more online education, so that's it's a big shift for a university like Leeds that's very traditional face-to-face campus-based experience, to be saying actually we'd really like to keep that going, but also support online education for professional learners who are never going to come to Leeds. And so I think that balance is really live, I think, in many universities at the moment.
Does something like that, a requirement for lifelong learning, have you already thinking along the lines of alumni engagement and relationships that you can leverage with people who are in the workforce, or just large local employers or even national employers that you partner with, or there's already a strong direction of travel from Leeds into their workforce?
Yeah, I think alumni is a really interesting space, because again, back to our kind of traditional model of education, we understand alumni who have graduated with a degree from the university. We know that after the graduation ceremony and the degree certificates in their hand, we know how to work with them as alumni. But as we move into lifelong learning, and particularly more online education, and as education becomes unbundled, we start to see alumni that have interacted with us maybe for smaller parts of learning, so maybe just a single credit bearing course, so they might just take a single module with us. They're alumni of the university. They've got accredited learning from us. And how do you deal with maybe 250,000 extra alumni who are interacting with the university maybe for a bite-sized part, have never been to Leeds, but they still feel part of a community, and we want them to feel part of our community. So I think the whole alumni space is going to change actually really quite significantly as we broaden that continuum of what we mean by student, and as we offer more types of award, and as you say, we partner with more other universities, with more companies, with more education providers. How do we manage our alumni through those journeys? I think that's going to be really interesting space.
Great, thank you, Neil. Jane, if I can bring you in at this point, I mean, I think it would be interesting if we've covered quite a lot already, but just to get an idea of how the work that Salesforce is doing with universities is changing. I mean, we've heard a lot about sort of the short-term responses and the medium to long-term planning. When you are tasked with helping universities manage their student journey, I know when we've spoken before, you said there have been some short-term measures that no one could anticipate, but there are also some now more strategic conversations that are happening with your university partners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alistair, and thank you to everybody attending today. And you're right, even when I was listening to this, I was thinking you're going to call on me, and we've covered a great deal of ground in a really short period of time. And I might just start by summarizing some of what everybody said, which includes, what we're hearing and I'm hearing, from your peers, from individuals, not just across the UK and EMEA, but I also support in Australia and New Zealand and have colleagues certainly in the Americas. And it is a lot on this, frankly, fundamental business model transformation, right? And what does this mean for institutions now as they look for, this more hybrid approach, this blending learning, also making sure there's diversity and inclusion, but this rise of lifelong learning. I even think about, and I'm kind of going the big picture, but kind of some areas that I'll talk about universities have supported more on that area, but also continuing to support the current student experience. Frankly, what we opened up with, and Louise, you shared, and then David, in terms of expectations, in terms of how do you create that community and better serve your students, and frankly, even be more proactive in serving your students. So you alluded to earlier, retention, Louisa, that's where, leveraging technology, some of our peer institutions are starting to say, okay, let's gather all this data and let's start to make have some insights about them so we can be more proactive and identifying at-risk students as an example. But to further mark what you were talking about at Newcastle, that assumes that you have the right infrastructure in place. And Joe, to what you were talking about, how do you make this change from the physical to the digital infrastructure, and what does that mean? And currently, not surprisingly, technology mirrors what's been traditionally at a college institution or a university institution, where there are silos. And so you have a lot of these point solutions, as you were alluding to, Mark, across the campus. But it is then, how do you think about managing this data, having quality data so that you can gather insights and be much more strategic, again, for the short term or the longer term. Now, some areas where I know we've seen some of our customers really innovating is on the topic of lifelong learning, where there are some universities who have set up kind of this education marketplace, if you will, for micro-credentialing. And literally, Neil, you just mentioned this, to be able to come and take these kind of short courses on demand, more for the alumni, so that they continue to be reskilled and upskilled, which I think is even more paramount now in the post-COVID era. Even before we went into the pandemic, World Economic Forum used to talk about within 5 years, 65% of individuals would need to be reskilled or upskilled. I anticipate that's got to be closer to 85 or 90. So how are you continuing to impact your communities, serve your students, whether it's that traditional 18 to 20-year-old or those adult learners, lifelong learners? So Alistair, I'm not sure exactly if that's what you wanted, but I think, how it's changing was actually the question. I think it is thinking about, how do you have the systems, the technology, the platforms in place? How do you think about also that, not only the infrastructure, but the integrations, Mark, that you mentioned, and be able to gather those insights in the right way? And back to the question around change and culture, you need to be bringing this institution along the journey with you. And so really prioritizing in the area that's most important for you as an institution. You're not going to be able to do everything at one time. I mean, like you said, Mark, it's setting these realistic expectations. So it's choosing one priority and really being able to focus there to deliver the impact, and being able to upskill and reskill staff along the way so they feel bought into the journey. And Joe, as you mentioned, they feel more part of the process, and this is, exciting to them, engaging them in moving forward. So those are just some thoughts. Clearly, I've got a lot to add and share because it's something that I'm passionate and excited about.
Brilliant, thank you, Jane. Jeremy, I'd like to come to you next. We haven't come to you previously, just to speak about your role at York, and where you have you're a business analyst there, and you've worked on projects like in onboarding CRM systems in the past. What opportunities now exist for universities to sort of grow and diversify from an operational point of view if they get the infrastructure right, do you think?
Alistair, yeah, so I'm a senior business analyst at University of York, and sort of joined the call today that off the back of a recent Salesforce implementation at the back end of February. So we've introduced the Service Cloud for our sort of service management, which is used across a number of teams of IT, accommodation services, decks, etc. So a number of teams are using that functionality, and we're now at the stage where we're looking at where can we now expand on that functionality and use that further across the university. So really sort of switching from, it's interesting, there echoes of a lot of the sort of comments already, but that shift from focus on physical buildings, work, but in terms of improving sort of student frontline services, how students are able to interact with those teams, and how we can actually use the technology now to join up those experiences in terms of sharing information where appropriate to do so, and look out sort of for trigger points in terms of student welfare, where we can actually recognise and use the technology data there to identify those issues. I think Mark mentioned it, just in terms of data, sort of probably one of the big issues in terms of it's everywhere, and it's just in terms of how we integrate that, and really trying to create that 360 view of the student in one place, and which we don't sort of currently have. So it's exciting, and Salesforce gives us quite a few different opportunities to do that and expand on that. It's just I think making sure we're aligning that from a sort of strategic positioning that's sort of driving the change, and looking at how we can use Salesforce really as the enabler to support the change that's taking place across the uni.
Are you being asked to try and solve particular problems with data in the short to medium term?
It's how we can improve on that in the future, really. So it's at the minute it's time-consuming task for various different reports. Just actually gathering the information from various different sources. So there's lots of requirements in terms of being able to make that process easier in terms of creating those reports, dashboards from the outset. So lots to go at.
Great, thank you, Jerry. I imagine there's a lot of work ahead, and it's an ongoing process. I wanted to pick up on one of the points. I think it was Neil mentioned the sort of broader collaboration with perhaps other institutions or international collaboration, because once you experience that kind of unbundling of what your university can offer to different people at different times, there then perhaps becomes more of a pressure politically within the UK, but also within institutions to look at how international education is offered across different countries and to different types of learners. I was wondering if any of the panelists had any experience of that already, or if they'd already started to have conversations along those lines about how international education may start to change at their institutions. So David, you I don't know if you blinked first, or no, not happened yet.
No, I'm quite happy to
to
explore. I mean, at Newcastle we have 2 overseas campuses. Anyway, one in Malaysia with a medical school, and another one in Singapore, which is not too far away. But then in Newcastle we enjoy our rich and diverse international community that comes to Newcastle for the Newcastle experience, which always seems to score highly with the students. I think we are thinking about how those experiences, both the ones that our students enjoy in our other campuses and the ones that the international students enjoy in Newcastle, can be enhanced by this. And what does it mean in the world where perhaps some of those students can't necessarily travel as freely at the moment as we might like them to do? And do we have to have them travel and come here for that duration, for the whole duration? It comes back to that big question, which is particularly for us, and may be different for the Open University with the model it teaches in, but for Newcastle, being here in Newcastle, or being in Malaysia on our campus, being in Singapore on our campus, is part of that, and how the people create that community there is part of that experience. And I think that's the thing that we're beginning to wrestle with. I wouldn't say we've got it all figured out. We're beginning to wrestle with, what does that mean for us, and how do we make sure that if someone has to be or chooses to be somewhere else for part of the time, then how do we make sure we continually extend and embrace that experience out to wherever they happen to be sitting, even if that's not actually Newcastle?
Thank you, Mark. Does this perhaps also create opportunities for staff themselves to work in a more flexible way and perhaps not necessarily be tied to a particular location in order to contribute to the courses and curricula that universities offer? Again, I was wondering if there'd been any discussion about in terms of how teams are changing within the universities and how people may start to work together to deliver courses in a different way going forward.
I think that, if I may jump in again, I think that too is a subject of current quite vigorous debate. I'm not going to say it's over yet. I think we are debating that. And I know from speaking to the other Russell Group IT directors that this is a story that's happening in all of our institutions. So it would be in Glasgow and it'll be in York and other places. We attach different labels to it. At Newcastle, we talk about blended working. And it is finding that balance where what we've learned through COVID and working in a way where we've run, a world-class university for 15 months now without anybody being on campus, as it were. What does that mean? And the things we've learned, and Leeds, sorry, and what does that mean for the future? And we're trying to detach the two a little bit, because there's a danger that we kind of get mixed up in the coming out of lockdown gameplay to what we need to do in the longer term. So we're trying to have a really calm head and think about the future, think about what we've learned in the last 15 months, and then try and apply that to a different way of creating and sustaining the experiences in the longer term. And that's not proving easy, but it's something we're all engaged with.
And Mark, that's not surprisingly a conversation that's happening globally, right? Everything that you've just said. And, I think especially in the UK, having been in that lockdown for so long, how do you support on that short term, but then still think about your long-term strategies, and how do you remain agile and pivot to what the needs are for the university, what's going to be changing, what's going to be potentially staying the same. But how do you support, like you said, Alistair, not only your students, but your faculty, your staff? If there's going to be this blended model, what does it mean? Because it has, tremendous repercussions moving forward. And just to come back to the earlier question on the international, I think, Mark, you were talking about it understandably from your current students, and that probably links into, again, that community and how do you build that community. But even at the start of the journey around recruitment and admissions, I think it's going to be very interesting as there's more global competition. How do you recruit students? What's the role of international agents? Do you even still need international agents? The whole visa process. So there's a lot of complexity, I even think, from the beginning of the journey all the way through, and yet an opportunity, if there is, also around lifelong learning. How do you engage other students who might not have been traditionally at your campuses, but you say, okay, well, how could you create this more virtual experience and community for them to feel part of Newcastle or Open University or Leeds or Imperial or whichever institution we're referring to today? I don't know if others have thought. I jump in here, Alistair.
No, it's fine, Jane.
A bit of a dialogue.
It's okay. Louise, I was wondering if I could ask you just a little bit more about the online student experience role at the OU, and whether you anticipate how sort of learner habits have been changed permanently by this, and will there be sort of a permanent sort of expectation by students to have greater flexibility in how they learn, which will perhaps change the way that staff teach and collaborate in terms of when you're building new curricula or adapting courses you already have, but future-proofing them as much as you can?
I think I've got a few comments on the different topics that you covered just recently. So, like internationally, most of our international reach is in sort of shorter courses, or in micro-credentials, as James mentioned, or in more professionally based courses. So where perhaps that traditional undergraduate experience, campus-based experience that most students are desperate for, is not quite so important. But we've been collaborating from a creation of content point of view for a very long time. And so that's not greatly new to us, but it's I think what's come out recently is that there is a real expectation of choice. So students now, they've seen that it works, and they have digital expectations that they know it's available. So there's that expectation that they should be able to choose how they learn. And so that might be that they want to be able to learn offline, they want to be able to learn online, they want to collaborate, they don't want to collaborate, they'd like a print alternative, or they, you know, there's all sorts of ways. I mean, we have such a large base of students that have declared a disability, which has been mentioned before, and a lot of that is because of the way that you know, we do teach, and we have all of those available resources for students. So and as I can't remember who mentioned it, but a lot of it is about, you know, social anxiety. If you don't particularly want to sit in a massive lecture theatre, you know, that online alternative is very, very appealing. So I think what we've really seen is that there's an expectation that you should be able to learn how you want to learn, and have that blended approach with what suits you, so that you can pick and choose how the best sort of, you know, and as it's been mentioned, some courses are easier, some subjects are easier to do online than others perhaps, or more lend themselves to that way of teaching. But, you know, it's all possible. You know, we have virtual labs, we have all sorts of things. So there's nothing that can't be done that I've seen yet. It's just working out the best way of doing it. And the best way of doing it is absolutely by listening to the students that have done it, and the teachers that put those courses together.
Brilliant, thanks, Louise. Dan, I was wondering if I could come back to you just to talk a little bit about your work, because it's a subject and a field of expertise that's very much tied to a physical location and the sense of place of where you are. Do you anticipate sort of cohorts changing over time because of this, having, you know, with so much teaching and learning being forced online?
I think so, yeah. So this is a really interesting discussion, actually. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One is that I've taught now in 3 universities this year, and probably I would have had to have gone and done them face to face any other time. They would have said, it's not possible to do this, you must come and you must teach it in the classroom. And I've done it online, and actually from my perspective and from what the students have said to me, I think it has worked better. We've been able to build more community with the online stuff than we would have actually achieved face to face. So that's good. The other thing is, so I've been talking about this whole online thing and blended learning and business models for opening up bits of courses for CPD for about 15 years. And it never really worked because the time wasn't right. And the things that weren't right were the technology for the delivery, the technology for the creation of the materials wasn't right. The staff weren't in the right mindset. They were saying, we can't do it, or it takes too long, or if I let you record my lecture, you'll fire me and just use the recording from then on. So people were scared and people were reluctant to do it. And the technology's moved on, the attitude and experience of everyone has moved on, and now I think it becomes genuinely possible that we can solve the problem of online learning being so expensive by making the same bits of educational content available to the different audiences. And we have in my area this huge need for education and training, but no one actually wants to do a full degree, not even a short degree. They all want this on-demand learning of small topics, crucially, when they need them. So they don't even, like, they'll ring you up and say, have you got a course in this? And you say, yeah, you wait until September. It's like, no, I need it now. wait until September. So there's huge opportunities here for asynchronous learning, for delivery online, for this accessing students in the workplace. What the discussion earlier about alumni was really interesting, and like if you've got a group there with your alumni of students or potential students that know the quality of your product, so you have people that you can market to. But there's a whole load of people out there that willing to take things on, and I've done a lot more.
I'd also comment that while there's also we're concentrating on let's say, the more mature market, there's also a place, I think, for technology as well in raising aspirations of young people in feeling that they can come to a university like Newcastle, like Leeds, and succeed. I mean, a strong sort of strategy at Newcastle is engagement in place. We do live in the northeast of England. There are pockets of deprivation in this area, and I think it's really important that we do outreach to these students. And technology does facilitate that in a quite dynamic way. You can quite easily give a guest sort of speaking send a guest speaker to the classroom to talk to these students in a sort of COVID secure way. And I think the ability to have that outreach with those students and to show that we wish to engage with them is a really important part of the process of making students feel that they can travel to these places, even virtually, and these are places which they can see themselves at, which is, to be honest, part of the problem. Sometimes many students don't see themselves at these more research intensive universities that some of us work at.
Yeah, well, I remember from my own personal experience, I was like that as well. And this is a good example of the accessibility. My university has always been one that's tried to be good on accessibility to get those disadvantaged students in. But often the students have had not a good experience, or they've left because it's not right for them. But with the online stuff, if they can take short courses, they can get that taster. They can see whether it fits with their with what they're able to do, with all the other things that they have going on in their lives. So I think it will help with retention of students, with quality of the student experience, and actually reaching out to quite a wide range of people that would not normally go to these universities. So yeah, I would agree.
Thank you both. Neil, I was wondering if I saw you nodding away. It's just the perils of Zoom. I can kind of peer into people's reactions while others are talking. I mean, to Daniel's point about it's sort of taking away the fear factor of, and also the barriers to entry caused by time and place, and also having greater flexibility for staff to teach at multiple universities throughout the year. I mean, are these some of the things that you are looking to open up at Leeds? Have you tried them already? Where are you on that?
Yeah, no, I was nodding away because it's just great to hear this conversation happening. I think, like others, it's been something many of us have wanted to see more of, and it's great that this is now the mainstream conversation about the future of our universities. So, yeah, it's really exciting conversation. I mean, I think we're pretty much where everybody else is. We really want to make this happen. A lot of it has been about kind of staff resistance pre-COVID, not really understanding the art of the possible, and not really wanting to change. Everybody's quite comfortable with the way the universities operate, but I think COVID is a real shift for everybody in the way that we think now about the future of our role and what our mission really is. So for me, I do see it as a real big opportunity. It's been a time of rapid upskilling for staff. You know, Daniel talking about the benefits that come from being able to interact with students around the world. Almost every academic in the world has now experienced that. So they've seen the potential of this. Of course, there are problems and barriers, but they're kind of COVID related. And if we take the positives from this, the opportunities are actually endless to think about the ways in which we could provide more access to higher education in the future. And I think that's really exciting. For me, I was thinking about pathways. So I was really thinking about, you know, that journey from, as somebody said, from school right through the university experience, right into work. There's so many types of courses now that people can pick up that give them that access when they want it, either online or in person, or a blend of the two. And you can really support people right the way through their educational journey. And that's just so exciting if we're willing to think differently about the conception of a university and who it's there for. I think that's our biggest barrier, is ourselves thinking we're here for a particular purpose. And if we're prepared to think we can widen the purpose that we're here for, with the opportunities are amazing. The last thing I'd say, I mean, I think there are some cultural barriers that remain, of course, to online. I think after COVID, we will see some countries going very back to the kind of traditional face-to-face experience. So we'll need to continue to the work to think that actually this type of learning is valuable. It really does support flexibility and inclusivity and maintains quality and outcomes. We have a joint school with Southwest Jiaotong in China, and they're really pushing for flying faculty to go back and deliver lectures in the classroom, despite the fact we've been doing it virtually for 15 months. And I think there's still work to do to convince people that a different way of teaching and different modes does not mean lower quality. And I think that's the argument we're going to need to continue to have.
Great, thank you, Neil. Jane, I'd like to come to you if I can, just because I think we've picked up some interesting points, which is also the very start of the student journey perhaps looks slightly different now to what it did even a few months ago, in terms of there's stuff going on in the UK in terms of the nascent skills bill that's been announced by the government, and also the ongoing sort of slow burn of the levelling up agenda, and what that will look like in terms of increasing funding and participation in places outside South East England. But with that in mind, is there now a need for sort of really effective monitoring around sort of getting people into universities and avoiding the kind of attrition that Daniel was talking about, where people come in and either the course is wrong or the culture is, they're in the right place at the wrong time, or whatever happens, supporting universities so they can really understand why they're getting the attrition they perhaps get when they reach out into low-income areas or low access areas, to try and support those learners and give the administrators and the teachers everything they need to try and stop that happening.
Yes, I mean, I think this is very much along the lines of the comments and conversation with Daniel and David, right? There's huge opportunities to leverage technology across widening participation, diversity, inclusion, of all, backgrounds, gender, races, however we want to qualify that or talk about that. But it is also fundamentally about this data at the onset and having more visibility and understanding. And Jeremy, you were alluding to this, we often call it 360-degree view of an individual. But if you have some more information and insights on the students as they're beginning to enroll, and then being able to share that information with those academic departments, even before they begin, you can start to tailor that journey very early on and put them on a very customized path. Or even what we're seeing universities do is create communities, virtual communities, even before they're physically or digitally, or however we want to talk about it, on their campuses. And so you start to connect them with faculty, staff, even with alumni mentors, so that they feel more supported from really the first touch point. I think, some other insights just to share on this is we recently conducted a student report, and it's not surprising that we heard that 77% of students said that personalized messages help them feel that their institution cares about them. So even being able to deliver more personalized communications to these students and then leveraging technology to be able to do so, I think is from the start of the student journey, and then being able to carry it all the way through. But it is being able to have that data, that insight, being able to manage it so that you can put together a really customized path for these students. Alistair, I also wondered if Juan here might have some insights from, I think he's joining us from Imperial today, because we haven't heard from him yet. And I believe he's also a CIO, and what his perspective is as well. Putting you on the spot there, Juan. I'm sure your peers would welcome hearing from you.
I thought I got away with it. I was hoping to learn from everyone here. So I'm new to the sector as well. So this is all very informative. For myself, I joined Imperial as CIO around 15 months ago. And of course, COVID pushed us online. We were traditionally very much a campus-focused university, and we've moved online with multimodal education, high flex classrooms. We even have a circuit board in a box to deal with the necessities of continuing education through COVID. But from a technology perspective, as an organization, we've traditionally been very fragmented. So very much what Mark was describing has been a challenge for us. Fragmented from the technology side of things, data has been a massive challenge for us, and also fragmented as an organization. Marketing, recruitment, and admissions, until very recently, were 3 separate departments. So we have to make changes both culturally that will lead to organizational changes, as well as lead with the technology to think about the future. I don't think Imperial will ever move online. That's not going to be the path, but I think we're going to continue to deliver a lot more mixed mode type of education. And so over the last year, a couple of things has happened. As an organization, I think Imperial did recognize this fragmentation. They also recognize some opportunities for the future. And if they want to remain or differentiated in the marketplace, we're going to have to deal with the data challenge. So we've got 3 or 4 little initiatives across the college to deal with that. So from the technology perspective, I'm looking at data, bringing data together from all of those different sources so that we can deliver a great experience back into the student. From the way we organize ourselves, we're coming together much more as well in terms of an organization by bringing marketing, recruitment, admissions, registry, etc., together into an organization so that we can think about the student life cycle end to end. And clearly CRM is a critical component of that. We've got 28 different things that we call CRMs, even Salesforce, multiple instances of there as well. And then we have a big strategic effort, which we call precision education, which tends to leverage all of that and thinking about the student and how we deliver that tailored education and that tailored curriculum back into the student and give them a really good personalized experience through the college. So lots going on around Imperial. And
I was just wondering if are you setting timeframes for sort of updating and modernizing and changing the way you do things? I mean, I know a lot of it's been forced on you already.
Yeah, so we clearly our priority through the pandemic was to get past the pandemic, but also think about the future. And so we see the next year very much as helping us transform the core foundations to be able to do these things. So we now have plans in place through the 21-22 financial year, as most, I guess, across higher education, the financial year starts in August. That's for us. And we have a set of efforts, one big effort around data, which also combines bringing together a working group around CRM effectively. So how do we start to think about the student from an end-to-end perspective? And this is massive progress from an Imperial perspective, because all of that fragmentation, all of that silo work now has come together into very focused type of groups. And then we have another group focusing on what we call precision education, which is very much thinking about leveraging that data and that insight and applying machine learning, AI techniques, and working with neuroscience and the School of Computer Science to effectively look at new ways to sense that data so that we can start to innovate in terms of how we think about the student and their life through the college, through education. And a lot of the students go to university for a whole plethora of reasons. And so understanding those reasons and the motivations of every student, it's really helpful for us. Some even go to learn and to learn a career but a lot, especially the undergraduates go because of the social side of things, and depends on the age and the lifelong learning. The things that Neil was talking about are also important there.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that very neatly takes us up to time. I'm sure we could go on because there are plenty of other issues to discuss, but I think we've done a reasonably good job breaking down one silo at least today by having such a wide range of people coming in to talk. So thank you all very much for giving us your time. It's been really interesting to hear about your work, and we appreciate it. And there'll be an on-demand version of this discussion made available on the Times Higher Education website. There'll also be a summary article. So if you'd like it for reference or to share with colleagues, then we will send it out to you after the event. So thank you all very much for participating, and I hope we see you all again soon.